Welcome back to the NUTRIMEDICAL Report, and we have the remarkable author and ancient archaeologist, Jonathan Gray. His amazing website is required reading. If you're listening to this program, you need to get these ebooks. They are at beforeus.com, beforeus.com. Jonathan, I think we're in the Forbidden Secret book, which is quite a large book. It's 624 e-pages, and we're up to Chapter 9, and I think we're going to do Chapter 9 and 10 if we're lucky today. Let's start off with the top of the subject.
Right. Well, we know that evolution is a fake, and the extraterrestrial origin of man is no better. That leaves us with a creator who cares about his creation and has communicated with us right through history. And that's the big question. He's personal. He's not part of his creation. He is not, all of the creation is not God. God created what we see and what we don't see. He created the universe, and he's above it, he's outside it, but he is through it. And he is not only our creator, but he loves us, he cares about us. And if you care about someone, you like to communicate and interact with them, and I think this is what we're going to talk about today.
The other thing people should grasp is the two principles, which are one of the reasons why Satan's attack has been so vicious against the Jewish and Hebrew people, and why the initial two houses of Israel were scattered at Jezreel, which means to scatter them around the world. Most of the northern tribes the 10 tribes ended up scattered throughout Europe. The southern tribe, which is Judah and the half-tribe of Benjamin, much of it was cast into apostasy that occurred in Babylon over 1,600 years, and has continued in the Talmud. And what's important that people should understand is this vision of God that you're talking about, where he is outside of the continuum of time and space, that he is not part of the chaos of the ancient pagan religions that believed the universe was created by wars between gods and demigods, that in fact the Creator literally spoke the world into existence as a non-violent act, and that he sustains it by the words of his own thought, that he is outside of time, space, any past, present, or future. So I call him the great is. In other words, God always is. He was there prior to even the first idea of even the word idea. He created everything that ever existed and every thought that ever existed and ever was, and he's outside of it, which makes it so amazing. This viewpoint and understanding of God basically had to be inspired by a supernatural being that created the Bible, which proves by its very existence and the prophetic word in it that it is a trans-dimensional and a supradimensional book that transcends not only all the dimensions of the spirit realm, but the entire universe itself. It transcends the idea of time and space. And there's no other book in history like the Biblia, the book called the Bible. Even with the mistranslations and the other things, the Bible interprets itself, so it can often straighten out things if you're logical when you approach it, and you approach it with a contrite and humble heart and in prayer. So those two witnesses of your intellect and your prayer, you're going to find the truth if you seek it. That's what makes it so important to understand what you're teaching here in this remarkable book called The Forbidden Secret.
And this naturally raises the question as to whether God is just some impersonal force or a personal being. There's a little confusion out there because of the Eastern mysticism that's been invading the West. Well, now look, let's ask ourselves, did our own personality come from impersonality? Is the intelligent programmer who produced our DNA, which we've talked about in the past, who designed us to be personal, intelligent, thinking, speaking, communicating beings, does that designer have less than those abilities? Would he not possess the same ability to think, speak, communicate that he's put into us? And the intelligence that made the ear, can he not hear? Whoever designed the eye, can he not see? Whoever taught us how to speak and think, can he not speak and think?
Can he not have a sense of humor, too?
Doesn't logic tell us that a cause is greater than the effect? An effect is never greater than the cause, and you never get more information from less information. Information can only come from intelligence, and there's no other way. Even the most able scientists can say it. We all know from common sense that language does not come out of nothing. Understanding does not come from nothing. It can't create itself.
Right.
And this brings up the next question: would he have the ability to speak to us? Okay, now look, we've got a beautiful black Labrador dog, Dr. Bill. We've had him since a pup. He's a darling. And after feeding him, do we take no interest in talking to him? We hear him barking. We see the joy in his eyes. We feel him licking our hand. Do we never want to experience him to experience that we love him too? Don't we ever want the pet to know that we really care about him? Of course we do. Now, who planted that ability and that desire in our hearts? Haven't we considered the Supreme Being's ability and willingness to hear us? And since we're designed to receive information, then might our Maker desire to communicate with us and send us messages. Now, would that make sense?
Absolutely.
And so we've got one here who is a master designer. He has interdimensionally transmitted coded data into our molecules. He's programmed our DNA to send millions of messages a second through our bodies. And who says he cannot pass on additional information in other ways, even to guiding human minds to write down messages? And this is where we come to the Bible. Okay, now, if we go to the Bible, we find, as you said, it's very unique. It's totally explainable. It's totally understandable. It's interlocked. One part explains another, and if one part is vague, another part will make it clear. And this document, 3,800 times, makes what some people would say an outrageous claim to be not man-made, but to be the Creator himself speaking to us. But not only that, he challenges us to disprove it. And this morning I'd like to accept that challenge, not to disprove it, but to show how basically honest and sensible this document and valuable this document really is.
Yeah, even right into the DNA code for our bodies, because if we weren't made complete and perfect before, you can't just insert a group of genes and expect it to create either an organism or a being as advanced as humans. It had to be perfect by this perfect designer before the first person was born that could even reproduce. So that everything had to be perfect and transmitted literally from an infinitely intelligent God before we could even exist.
Absolutely.
In other words, the hologram of our DNA, only 7% codes for the 32,000 alleles of protein. The other 93% literally codes for hologram how to build us, which means that perfect hologram had to be transcendently transmitted through you call the interdimensional code from a superior being. It could not have happened randomly, as they talk about random selection or point mutations, because they're always lethal.
Yeah. Now, for some people today, the study of history and the study of life itself is incorporated with ideas that there is no God, that miracles are not possible, and that we live in a closed system and there's no supernatural. And with these presuppositions, these people begin their critical, as they call it, critical, open and honest investigation of history. And so when they study, for example, the story of Moses and the crossing of the Red Sea, they conclude from their assumptions that it was not a miracle or even perhaps a real event, because we know, not historically but philosophically, that there is no spiritual dimension. Therefore, these things could never have happened.
Right.
And they rule out the exodus of the Israelites even before they begin their historical investigation. Well, let me say this. These suppositions are not scientific biases, but they're rather philosophical prejudice.
Exactly. It's important to distinguish that, because you've been there to do the archaeological digs at the Red Sea and found the chariot wheels. In fact, you mentioned before the show today, you're staring at one of them right in your study or studio.
Yeah.
We'll be back in just a moment with amazing Jonathan Gray, BeforeUs.com. Welcome back back to the NutriMedical report, and yeah, this is quite amazing. Please continue, because you had some first-hand experiences, and I saw a video over the Christmas holidays talking about this archaeological research, and I had talked to years ago Ron Wyatt. I think, of course, Ron died, I believe, and there's a museum back there with some of his work. You've been doing diving in that particular area, so give us some of the real facts here, because when you actually look into it accurately, not the foolish pseudoscience of people like our oceanographer of great fame from France that tries to pretend he searched in the right area and found nothing, that this biblical story was a myth. The fact is, repeatedly when they've checked the historical and archaeological facts correctly, and they look at things like a marker stone, which is still there, that shows the Hebrews crossed here from the Sinai Peninsula, which is exactly where you're diving, they find the archaeological evidence that proves the Bible is always true.
Yes, that is right. And most people do not take the Bible story literally, and therefore they assume that a miracle didn't happen. The Bible says that a miracle certainly did happen. It was a combination of human effort, of obedience and faith, linked with the ability of our Creator to do what He wants with what He's created to make something happen. Now, so many archaeologists over the years have been looking for the Red Sea remains or evidence in the wrong place, simply because they looked at the Gulf of Aqaba and said that's too deep. They looked at the Gulf of Suez, and which both these are two arms of the Red Sea, and said that's shallow enough. Okay, it could have happened there, and that must be where it happened, because it wasn't a miracle. It was simply a shallow water, and that's how they got across. Well, Jacques Cousteau is the Frenchman you were speaking of, Dr. Bill.
Right.
And he actually went, in fact, my friend Ron Wyatt, we worked together very, for quite a long time before he died, and I trust that man with my own life. I know that if I went into a situation in the Middle East, and I knew this was possible, and I was kidnapped by terrorists, he would hear about it in the States, he would fly out, and he would do his best. Even if he was losing his life to do it, he would want to rescue me, and I would do the same for him. That's how well I got to know the man. Right.
So I know Ron Wyatt was an amazing man. He also did a lot of research on the presence and the location of the Noah's Ark, also up in the mountains of Ararat in Turkey.
That is correct, yes. Now, getting back to the Red Sea crossing, what Ron did was this. He ignored what the archaeologists were saying, that there were no remains there. In fact, Jacques Cousteau, I'll just finish that one, took his Calypso up and down the Gulf of Suez, and when Ron walked into his office a few months later, he spoke to the girl and said, well, now look, last year I was asking Jacques if we could use his submersible to explore the bottom of the Gulf of Aqaba, or the bottom of the Red Sea. He didn't say what part of the Red Sea. And Jacques said, well, I will come in with you so long as you don't try to push the Bible on anything we discover. And Ron said, well, no deal, because this is a biblical event anyway. 12 months later he came back, and the girl, she must have had a bit of a tiff with her boss, because she just spilled the beans. She said, oh look, Jacques went down to the Red Sea, and he went with his submersible, found there's nothing there. So Ron said to the girl, well, show me on the map where he went. And she pointed to the Gulf of Suez, and Ron said, oh, well, that's okay. If there's nothing there, there's nothing there, and he walked out. He didn't say to the girl, no, he looked in the wrong place. He was more courteous than that. He said, if there's nothing there, there's nothing there. And what Ron had done was to follow the biblical directions, which specifically stated the geography of the land as they were approaching the sea. Now, the geography of the land as you approach the Suez is very, very flat on all sides. The book of Exodus says that they were hemmed in, they were shut in, which means that there had to be mountains or land rising around them as they were approaching. And that applies only to the Gulf of Aqaba branch of the Red Sea. And following that direction and finding a huge beach that was large enough for 3 million people, plus Pharaoh's army, that's the beach at Nuweiba on the Gulf of Aqaba facing Saudi Arabia. Ron and his two sons initially started diving, and within the first half hour they'd seen the first chariot wheel there underneath them as they were diving, right there, lying on the seabed, and subsequent searching further out and deeper uncovered the remains of chariot parts, cabs, wheels, the wheels all removed from the chariots, just as the book of Exodus said, and skeletal parts of horses and men scattered around all in between. Now, I went out with a briefcase full of objections to shoot the man down, and he bothered me enough with his answers that I thought, well, maybe there is something in this, so I took my own teams down and we started diving. Got some of the best international divers that I could find. And we went diving and we found the same. And we've been down there quite a number of times, and the remains are there, no question about that, Dr. Bill.
Now, what's important is the Bible always has often an early, we call a double prophecy. In other words, there's often an early prophetic thing like the Aliyah of the return of the Hebrews to the land of Israel that occurred with the Exodus. There's also supposed to be an end time Aliyah from all four corners of the earth. It says that the original Aliyah returning from Egypt to Israel will be so tiny compared to the Aliyah coming back to Israel in the end, when the Messiah returns, that it will almost be forgotten. And I mean, what we have to understand is build people's faith up and hope, because a lot of times I see this year people their hope is being dashed. Like right now, Ron Paul was fourth in the primary here in South Carolina. They need to know we need to build up hope. Hope is not in a politician. Hope is in our Creator God. Hope is not even on our ability to prepare ourselves for whatever disaster. It's on our Creator God. And when they stood there on the edge of the beach, remember, there was a story in the Bible that talks about Naaman, who actually, when Moses commanded and his arms were being held up by his young man holding his arms up, because while his arms were held up, the water would stay parted, that before the waters parted, Naaman jumped into the water up to his ankles, and then the water parted away. So that shows the kind of faith we have to have, considering the kind of craziness that's going on in our world right now. The ancient Hebrews had it, and they also didn't just go across, the easy way. Well, they just waded across, and they managed to cross the Suez, the Gulf of Suez. No, this was in an area that, for all purposes, when you stand up there and you got the Egyptian army behind you, you're toast. You're in big trouble, and unless God does a miracle, 3 million Hebrews are going to die.
Yeah, absolutely. And, some people say, well, okay, if you're talking about the Gulf of Aqaba, firstly, it's too deep, and secondly, it's too far. How could they have got across in one night, all those people? Well, look, I've sat down and worked out the mathematics of this, and I'd invite any skeptic to do the same. From our diving at the Egyptian end of the crossing, we originally assessed the width of there's an underwater bridge there. Actually, right. There's a great canyon. It ends up in Africa, and it's given the name there, the Great African Rift, but it continues up out of Africa, up through the Red Sea, up and...
Right, keep that thought. We'll be right back. Well, interesting fact you pointed out on the break there. I'd like you to repeat it, because the Israelis did better mapping of this bridge than the British or anybody else. But it also brings up an interesting point that we have this conundrum, this sense of geopolitical, historical, cognitive dissonance, where the Israelis want to know about these miraculous things that happened that allowed them to literally survive the attack by the Egyptians that would have wiped them out, except for a miracle of the Most High God. But the state of Israel was founded by people like Joe Slovo, who's a member of the Russian Duma, the Russian Communist Party, and the Sabbateans, who were the Bolsheviks, which are Satanists, along with the Sabbateans that made a deal with the Nazis in 1933 to form the Nazi Party, which is a Zionist combined with the German Nationalist Party to create a Sabbatean atheistic state, which the state of Israel was. And that's why they had conjoint members of their Knesset and the Russian Duma that were atheist, Sabbatean communists at the same time. And people don't want to know this, that there are comments by people like David Ben-Gurion that we shall amputate the gangrenous religious limb of Judaism, and yet the Jews want the proof that miraculous things happened to save these 3 million plus Hebrews, which included the house of Judah and the half-tribe of Benjamin and the 10 houses of Ephraim, or Joseph as well, which is why the prophecy that God gave back in Ezekiel, looking beyond space and time, I shall put the stick of Joseph and the stick of Judah together, and they shall be one stick in my hand. So beyond all these disasters and the coming disaster that Israel is pushing for now with Mr. Netanyahu, the idiot from Israel who wants the nuclear attack on Iran, and is pushing Europe to try to cause this embargo to create a thermonuclear conflict because he's coming up for election, they have this cognitive dissonance, and they don't want to accept the fact that the only reason why there are any Jews left in the world anywhere is because the Creator God preserved them through ancient times, and why there's any other Hebrews as well, which were scattered across the northern tribes of Europe. So, it's a very strange time we live in when they want to know the historical facts and even map out this bridge, but at the same time they don't want to accept the fact that the historical book, the Bible, the Torah, actually shows the reason why they actually even exist was a miracle itself.
Yes, and this is why the conflict in Israel in the attitudes toward these discoveries. There are authorities who belong to the Shabbatean group who hotly deny these things happened, and then there are just as many in Israel itself who accept the fact that these are miracles and that they did occur. And
right.
they face the evidence and acknowledge it. There's denial and there is acceptance. And the acceptance, of course, comes from honest hearts who don't have any prejudice against the Creator.
Right. And many of the people of Jewish persuasion, whether they're agnostics or Sabbateans or just basically secular Jews, are going to turn back and accept the fact that the Creator God dwelt in flesh as Yeshua HaMashiach, which means the one who is and always was, dwelt in flesh among us, and that he was here and he's coming back. And when he's coming back, a lot of prophetic things like the Great Aliyah, which most Torah Jews know, that it shouldn't have been a state of Israel in the first place, but again, it's an end-time prophecy, and unless you're in this time, you wouldn't understand it, that the state of Israel was founded like the fig tree, without figs, without any fruit. And that's what we're dealing with here. So your scientific discovery here just shows the dichotomy and the cognitive dissonance of the Israeli people, which is dragging the world toward Armageddon, which is the Valley of Jezreel. And it's interesting, some of the largest oil refineries now are in Haifa, which is right at the mouth of the Valley of Jezreel, and it goes all the way down to the great, the Dead Sea, and the southwest end of the Dead Sea is the largest deposit of oil on the earth, right at Mount Sodom, where we actually did prayer on the 1999 at the Yom Teruah, or the Jewish New Year, at the drill site of Hayseed Stevens Drill, where he lost his drill bit back some years ago at 16,000 plus feet, proving that there was enough oil there to supply the whole world for many tens of thousands of years. So the Hebrews are literally sitting on the largest deposit of oil and the largest deposit of potash on the planet. 95% of the proven potash on the earth is there at the end of the Dead Sea. So,
yep.
Dynastic wealth. And the fact is that God put it there not for this, stiff-necked and people that are aborting their own babies, planning a nuclear attack, and treating the followers of Islam and other satanic religion like they're dogs or animals, and planning a nuclear attack on Iran to, quote, prevent them from ever, quote, getting the potential for making a nuclear weapon. But because they are not repentant, God is putting Israel into the danger of being annihilated. And that's why it says the blood shall be up to the horses' bridles at the time of the end. In other words, the state of Israel is prophesied that it won't completely repent. It will bring warfare on itself and destruction. That's what the Bible says, doesn't it?
Yes, it certainly does.
Yeah.
Now, Dr. Bill, this crossing, of course, goes across a canyon, an underwater sea canyon, which is a continuation of the African Rift northwards through the Red Sea and then into the Jordan Valley up northward. Now, skeptics have said, but it's so deep, it's 5,000 feet deep, how could you get them down there and up again 5,000 feet? Ridiculous. Well, that would be ridiculous, I would agree with any skeptic, but that's not how the geography of this Gulf of Aqaba is. Most people are not aware that there is an underwater bridge spanning this great undersea canyon, and that it has apparently swept out, in my opinion, at the end of the Great Flood, when the waters were retreating from off the earth and sedimentation was being washed into the canyon that had split up during the event. And from both the Saudi Arabian eastern end and from the Egyptian western end, a huge bridge of sand and sediment piled up and joined from both directions until it was a continuous bridge. Now, although the canyon itself is 5,000 feet deep, this bridge only descends at a very, the descent into the canyon is a 45-degree angle all along the coast. If you want to go off the coast and across, you have to go down 45 degrees to the bottom, 5,000 feet, then up again 45 degrees, and that's impossible for any escape. But how the geography is now here, that this underwater bridge goes down at a gentle slope of 7 degrees. That's easy for anybody, and plus wheeled vehicles as well. 7 degrees gently to a maximum depth of 1,500 feet, and then back up again. It's like an arc which has just a very slow slope. Now, this is about a mile wide, and I've calculated if we only used a portion of that width, with 3 million people, suppose you're only using 4,000 feet of it, and they're walking at 4 hours walking time, and you give it a correct distance between them, using their carts, their cattle, everything else, you would have a line roughly about 9.6 miles long, and it would take 7.25 hours from the first to the last person to get across to the other side.
Well,
this would happen during the night, just as the Bible said.
Yeah, and then remember that most of the travel in the Middle East occurs at night, not during the day. Most people stay in their tents during the day, and that's why you see these cultures basically have a culture where during the heat of the midday they're in their homes, their adobe huts, they're in a sense, a lot of them are actually built below ground level too, so they're actually cooling, so that they have a constant temperature in there, so it never gets too hot or too cold.
Yes.
And those are very thick
when
walls.
you take into consideration all these facts, the whole thing becomes a very normal event, except for the miraculous scale of the water being pushed up on both sides.
Right.
Now, that's no problem either, because, we went diving, and we were diving down quite a depth, and it suddenly occurred to us that for this to happen, and for the Israelites to cross over, the Bible says that a strong east wind blew. Now, the kind of wind that you would need to blow to lift up water, talking about the deepest part, 1,500 feet above the bottom part of the crossing halfway over, you would need a super-duper hurricane.
Amazing.
But it wasn't because I didn't know enough.
Welcome back, and Jonathan, you had an amazing revelation there. I want you to repeat it. And when you said it, basically, I had one of those quick, what I call visions, and God showed me something very important. But repeat what you said there: that on either side of this advancing 3 million plus Hebrews were walls not just of water, but in this form called ice. And thick enough and hard enough that it actually lasted for the 9+ hours to allow them to cross. And it must have been created. And when you mentioned that, in an instant, I had one of these visions, and it was important. It's the first time I've actually had one right on my show in all these years. And what it was is I was shown these giant canyon walls on either side of the Red Sea, where a microburst would have created winds perhaps up to 600, 700, 800 miles an hour that could have hit there in as little as 6 to 8 seconds, and could have pushed the walls of water back and would create such freezing temperatures it could have dropped the temperature, because a microburst can bring air from the upper stratosphere as much as 50 to 100 degrees below zero, and could have frozen it in a matter of seconds and it instantly be gone. They had a microburst, for example, in Colorado, and believe it or not, that microburst only lasted a total of 8 seconds, and it cut down 800 square miles of forest and flattened it and froze everything in the forest solid. So you would go in there within hours afterward, all the trees were not only knocked down, but they were frozen solid.
Right.
So that's what it was, is with a microburst. So literally, not only God had prepared the bridge of land, but he actually had the microburst occur right at the time when Moses was believing God, and his men behind him, Joshua and Caleb, were holding up his arms so God could create the miracle, because he was into his late 80s by this time, or older. Actually, he was around 120, I think, was the age, because he returned after 40 years of them wandering in the desert. And when they crossed over that area there, he literally... God literally created a microburst there instantly to freeze walls of ice, and when the Hebrew pursuers, the Egyptian army with their chariots, which are like the advanced, like an M80 tank, the most advanced tanks you can get, in the American military, with advanced lock-on target weapons, and their bowmen with the most advanced weapon systems they had back then, were the fastest vehicle. When they crossed into the middle of this, they must have been in a state of shock when all of a sudden they could hear cracking sounds as the ice finally gave way and the Hebrews were safely on the other side. And the cracking...
Yeah, it's a spectacular event, and no question that it happened. And the microburst is an interesting approach to this. The book of Exodus, after we'd been diving, I was worried about how these walls of water could have held up. With the wind still blowing, they would have blown the Israelites away as they tried to come through. But I went
it was
into
only
the
8
book of
seconds.
Exodus a bit further, where they were singing that song of praise to God for their deliverance, and it's right there, not in the story of the event in the previous chapter, but it's right there in their song, where they state that the waters were frozen. The word used is they congealed. The waters congealed. Now, when blood congeals, what do you get? A clot. When water congeals, what do you get? Ice. So it's telling us that the water froze.
Right, and by the way, the amount of BTUs of energy that was translated, can you imagine an 8-second microburst that can cut down 800 square miles of forest in Colorado? And that happened.
When did that happen, Dr. Bill?
I believe it was sometime in the 90s. I'm trying to remember the exact date, but if you actually just Google microbursts, you'll find around the world that these things have happened periodically, but to happen at the precise second, at the precise time. And by the way, when this microburst would hit these canyon wall mountains, it would create a large sound very much like a shofar blowing, like a honk, like a very, very loud, extremely loud sound, and it would only last like the shevarim of a shofar being blown, literally saying it's time to come over.
That's a wonderful thing. And maybe it sounded like that to them.
Yeah, it did, and I'm sure it meant like, hey, okay, we believe you, Moses, we're going down there's dry land. And of course, Naaman was the first Hebrew that jumped into the water in the area, and it was, quote, up to his ankles, but God was going to do it. He jumped into his ankles, and all of a sudden, instantly, boom, in seconds, that microburst hit and froze walls of ice on either side and allowed them to cross. And what's amazing, you found the archaeological evidence of the chariot wheels, the horses, and the human bones there, indicating a large and vast army was destroyed that were pursuing the Hebrews to kill them, because Pharaoh decided, hey, I'm not letting these slaves go. I don't care about the loss of my firstborn son and these other plagues. They made this nation work. They got to get back here.
Yeah, that's right.
That's amazing.
And you know what? We've got here. My wife actually was diving on one occasion with me, and she has brought this up. We've got in my office right here, as I speak with you, Dr. Bill, just a couple of feet away at the most, even less, part of the chariot wheel, and this is from one of the chariots of Pharaoh's army.
Yeah, that's amazing. What's amazing is we're in the time now where those who are skeptical, it's fine. But if you're skeptical and also have prejudices, you have your prejudices overcome your skepticals, and you'll never see the truth unless you become humble. And again, wisdom, as it says, the meek shall inherit the earth. The meek are those who persist, number one, who believe in God and know that wisdom only comes to the humble. It doesn't come to those who accumulate knowledge, because wisdom only comes to those who understand that they do not comprehend the nature of the world, the nature of God, or the desperate situation we're in without the Creator.
Yeah. Now, Dr. Bill, a question does come up sometimes. How do you know that they're from this period? That's a good one. Fair enough. I'm going to cut this short, but I'll get to the point quickly. The significance of these finds is extremely important to dating. You cannot use carbon dating, and salt water leaches out any C14 molecules anyway. from
Right.
bodies and whatever if they've been underwater for 3,500 years. So there's no way anyone can carbon date these remains and expect a realistic date. Okay, now these wheels, one actually removed the hub of a wheel which had the remains of 8 spokes radiating outward from it. He took this to Cairo, to the office of Nasif Muhammad Hassan, the director of the International Section of Antiquities, with whom he was working. Dr. Hassan examined it and immediately pronounced it to be of the 18th dynasty of ancient Egypt. Now, this is the dynasty traditionally attributed to the 1500s, the time of the Exodus that the Bible dates. And when Ron asked him how he knew so quickly without having to go and get it tested, he said, the 8-spoked wheel was used only during the 18th dynasty, and this narrowed the date to the time of the Exodus.
Wow. You've done your homework, haven't you? And I'm sure
we have to cover every base because we're talking to people all over the world who are atheists and agnostics and skeptics, even Christian skeptics sometimes.
Well, the thing is, I believe that the most powerful Christians are what I call the Thomas Christians, where you basically say, God, prove it to me. And that's what you did, I'm sure, when you went to Ron Wyatt to say, Ron, who do you think you are? And he proved that our God is God. Just like Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, had to tell Daniel that, in fact, his God must be God. In other words, the great unseen God, the God that always was, that always is, that is above all the so-called gods and demigods, he is the only God that existed, that created everything that was and will be, and that we do not need to fear. We don't come out of a brew of chaos of these ancient pagan gods and goddesses fighting and giving birth to planets and different organisms and species, that the Creator God created all order out of nothingness. It says God created everything out of nothing. In other words, he is beyond the creation, and that's what's so important to understand. And your research today and in this book is so important. So I say, beforeus.com challenges all the skeptics out there, all the people that are atheists, agnostics, and what I call Thomas Christians, to say, prove it to me, God. I've just been diagnosed with cancer. Prove it to me, God. I've just lost my job. And what you need to do is you need to go back and read books like this and read your Bible to realize that it needs to give you back hope, faith, and trust in God, because even if you're on your deathbed, if you have that kind of faith, God will get you through it. God will get you through it. He'll get the world through it. He'll get Israel through it. If people like Netanyahu had the faith of Moses and of Naaman, we wouldn't have them calling for a nuclear attack on Iran. He'd have the faith to know that Israel would be preserved, even when America is renewing, loans for another 3-year extension and providing all these weapons. The weapons of warfare will not save Israel. The weapons of faith will. And that's important for people to understand. That's why we talk about health and wellness, too, and we have the most advanced wellness protocols. We need your support prayerfully to support what we're doing, because we need to reach out to more people, because when we bring on great guests like yourself, this is not just to entertain you, it's to transform you so you become literally a shining light in the darkness of our current world, which is very dark indeed. Closing comments, Jonathan.
Yes, you can trust the Lord totally. In the book of Revelation, it says that those who are going to survive the New World Order will be singing the song of Moses and the Lamb, a song of deliverance, just as God did for ancient Israel. His people, in the final analysis and the final showdown, are going to sing the same song of victory and having come through it safely.
Right. In other words, the song of Moses and the Lamb. And people have to understand what God's meaning there, but he always, he knows the end from the beginning, because our God is God. So the love of God will get you through this. And this book will help get you hope again, no matter what your circumstances. Thank you, Jonathan. We'll be back in 2 weeks. Tomorrow, Harley Schlanger from Austria, Bob Chapman from the International Forecaster, and Ted Anderson from Midas. Don't miss it.